It's almost unbelievable, but there it is in black and white. And this speaks to that more fundamental underlying problem. It at least raises the question, how does this happen? How do these scientific myths get perpetuated and actually institutionalized in dietary guidelines and other such things for decades and decades, for half a century, before finally coming under the light of scrutiny and being revealed? And the answer is actually remarkably simple and remarkably predictable. The answer, of course, is through government coercion.
Move over food pyramid. There's a new symbol to get Americans to eat right. Senior medical correspondent Elizabeth Cohen is here. So, Elizabeth, the pyramid is no more.
Right. This pyramid is going to be disappearing. That's why we said RIP. It's been around for almost 20 years. And ta-da! What we're going to have now is a dinner plate. Now, we don't know exactly what it's going to look like, Carol, because it hasn't been officially unveiled yet. But CNN has gotten word that the plate will be divided so that you'll see that half of what you eat every day is supposed to be fruits and veggies, smaller portions of a protein and a grain, and then a little bit of dairy off to the side. And they're really hoping that this icon sticks in people's heads better than the pyramid did.
I know, I was just going to ask you, what was so wrong with the pyramid anyway?
Well, take a look at it. It's not exactly the finest public health message this country has ever generated. I'll just put it that way. First of all, the stuff you're not supposed to eat is at the top, and that's sweets and fats. And usually we think of the top as the best, so it's counterintuitive. And also, Carol, you can see there's this heavy emphasis on breads and grains. That's at the bottom, the biggest portion. And then fruits and vegetables are smaller than grains, which doesn't really make any sense since experts, nutritionists say you're supposed to eat lots of fruits and vegetables. So it didn't convey the message very well. You didn't just look at it and go, oh, now I get what I'm supposed to do.
Yes, the good old food pyramid. I trust that if you're of a certain age, you will remember the food pyramid from your school days. Heck, I was Canadian, and I remember the Canadian government had some equivalent of the USDA food pyramid that was pumped into our heads at that time, with the 4 food groups and all of that. I remember that from my childhood days, but you may be surprised to learn, as I was quite recently, that yes, that's gone the way of the dodo. There is no food pyramid anymore. That's been replaced, and in fact you can get more details from choosemyplate.gov. Yes, there is a site called choosemyplate.gov that's brought to you by the U.S. Department of Agriculture that has a brief history of USDA food guides, from which you can see some of the 1910s to 1930s guides like Food for Young Children and How to Select Food, to the 1940s, A Guide to Good Eating, to the 1950s and 60s, Food for Fitness, a daily food guide, the 1970s, Hassle-Free Daily Food Guide, 1980s, The Food Wheel, which in 1992 officially became the Food Guide Pyramid, which in 2005 was replaced by the My Pyramid Food Guidance System, and in 2011 was usurped by MyPlate, which, yes, as CNN helpfully informed its viewers several years ago, now consists of fruits and grains, vegetables, protein, a little bit of dairy on the side. There you go, guys. This is what to eat, as brought to you by the truth tellers in the U.S. Department of Agriculture, with the imprimatur of the U.S. government behind it. What could go wrong? But actually, an interesting thing happens when you actually delve into some of these nutritional guidelines and dietary advice from the U.S. government and actually look at the specific advice and wording and the way it's changed over the decades.
The first official dietary guidelines for Americans were issued in 1980 and have been updated every 5 years since. Let's see how they've evolved over time. Originally, they recommended to maintain an ideal weight. They soon realized this was a bit of an overreach, so they switched it to, okay, at least maintain a desirable weight. As Americans got fatter and fatter, that became fine. How about just maintain a healthy weight? By the 1990s, they just apparently gave up and advised Americans to at least, improve their weight. Or at least aim for a healthy weight. And by 2005, apparently the best we can do is just try to manage it. Let's go back. Avoid too much sugar. Good for them, started out strong. But that's avoidance language, can't have that. So instead, use sugar. Don't avoid sugar, use sugar, but only in moderation. But only in moderation? Anti-American. So that became choose a diet moderate in sugar, as if we should go out of our way to make sure our diet has at least a moderate amount of sugar in it. Who doesn't want to appear moderate? Then they changed it into a verb, choose beverages and foods to moderate your intake of sugars. Sounds a little negative, and by 2005 there wasn't any sugar-specific guideline at all. They went from avoid sugar to, basically the same with many of the others. Avoid too much sodium. Ended up, choose and prepare foods with less salt. Choose especially whole grains, to choose carbohydrates wisely for good health. That's a guideline? The whole point of the guidelines is to give guidance. That's like, asking your mechanic what's the best way to maintain your car, and them saying, wisely. Avoid too much fat, saturated fat, and cholesterol. Started out pretty straightforward, but maybe a little too negative sounding to the meat, dairy, egg, and junk food industries, and so they changed it from avoidance to affirmation. Right? Choose a diet low in saturated fat and cholesterol. Of course, even that was too bold, and so again left with the cryptic, choose fats wisely for good health. As the American public has gotten fatter and sicker, you'd think the recommendations would get more stringent, more emphatic. Instead, there appeared to be more emphasis on the industry's bottom line, and less on America's waistline or lifeline.
What an interesting thing to do, simply to look at the advice that has been offered to different generations, and then to see the results of that advice, which we can, again, see with our own eyes in our daily activities, the ballooning waistline of people around the world, based largely on the changing diets and nutritional guidelines that people are encouraged to follow. And that is an interesting point, precisely because it does fly in the face of those who would inevitably go towards the first fallback in explaining how it is that nutritional science has gotten it so wrong for so long and led people down such blind alleys for so many years, giving them false tales about dietary cholesterol equals the cholesterol in your bloodstream, and fat is bad for you, and sugar is a good replacement, and all of this other nonsense that has literally made people fatter and sicker over the decades. How did that happen? Oh, it's just incompetence. Oh, it was lazy journalists and scientists that didn't know what they were doing. But don't worry, guys, we're getting it on track and everything's much better now. No, this is a rebuke to that, because you can see demonstrated in the guidelines of something like the USDA and its brother and sister agencies in various governments around the world that the entire process of deciding what choose my plate, please, government, choosemyplate.gov, is being left to the hands of the revolving door at the top, which we know is populated by the corporations. I've talked about this in many different aspects, in many different ways over the years, and this is just another very interesting and very, sickening, literally, example of how this is done. The fact that the stick of government coercion is always wielded by the big corporations that use government as their own personal piggy bank. And here is the perfect example of that. In fact, if you want to hone in on the very specific example, once again, the sugar conspiracy is a great way of putting this into perspective.
This is a disaster. An absolute unmitigated disaster. The fat's going down, the sugar is going up, and we're all getting sick. Now let me show you why. Okay. How'd this happen? Why did it happen? So this is where the politics comes in. This is the perfect storm. And it was created from 3 political winds that swirled around all at the same time to create this perfect storm. So, the first political wind, everything bad that ever happened in this country started with one man. okay? And it's still being felt today. Okay? So Richard Nixon, in his paranoia back in 1972, okay, food prices were going up and down and up and down. I'm going to show you that on the next slide. Okay? And he was worried that this was actually going to cost him the election. So he admonished his Secretary of Agriculture, Earl Rusty Butz, I love that name, okay, to basically take food off the political table, to make food a non-issue in presidential elections. Well, the only way to do that was to make food cheap. So he was out to find all methods to be able to decrease the price of food. Remember Nixon's war on poverty? We're suffering from it today. Okay? That's what this is. Okay? Second political wind, the advent of high fructose corn syrup. Okay? So this was invented in 1966 at Saga Medical School in Japan by a guy named Takasaki, who's still alive. Okay? As far as I'm concerned, this stuff is Japan's revenge for World War II. Except, of course, that they're suffering from it now themselves. Okay? Like everything, you know, it always comes back to haunt you. Okay? And it was introduced to the American market in 1975. So what do you think happened to the price of sugar when this thing hit the market? Here's what happened. So here's the U.S. Producer Price Index of sugar going up and down and up and down. Okay? This is not good. Okay? Stability is at 100%. If it stays nice and stable at 100%, that's what you want, okay, if you're a politician. Up and down. Here's where corn sweeteners entered the market, 1975, 1980, and you can see that since then, the price of sugar has remained remarkably constant. And it did so not just in the US, but also on the international stage. Here's the London price doing the same thing. And when you look at the difference in price between sugar and high fructose corn syrup, you can see that high fructose corn syrup is about half the price. Okay? So in other words, it's cheap. So high fructose corn syrup is evil, but it's not evil because it's metabolically evil. It's evil because it's economically evil. Because it's so cheap that it's found its way into everything. It's found its way into hamburger buns, pretzels, barbecue sauce, and ketchup. Okay? Almost everything. Okay? Somebody emailed me the other day and told me they went into their local grocery store and went through every single loaf of bread on the shelf. And out of 32 types of bread on the shelf, only one of them did not have high fructose corn syrup in it. Okay? So we are being poisoned by this stuff, and it's been added surreptitiously to all of our food, every processed food. Okay? And the question is, why? Well, you'll see why in a minute. Okay? So the corn refiners like to point out, well, it's just been a substitution. Okay? As the high fructose corn syrup's gone up, the sugar's gone down. We're just replacing, like gram for gram. Well, not exactly. Because here's 73 pounds of sugar per year. This is from the Economic Research Service of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Okay? So disappearance data. Okay? 73 pounds up to 95 pounds by 2000. Okay? And there's something missing from this slide. Anybody want to tell me what it is? What's missing? Juice. Juice is missing, because juice is sucrose, right? Sugar. And juice causes obesity. Okay? So this is a study done by Miles Faith, a prospective study in inner-city Harlem toddlers. Okay? And the number of juice servings per day predicts the change in BMI score per month in these inner-city Harlem toddlers. Now, where do these inner-city Harlem toddlers get their juice? From what? From where? From whom? From WIC. Anybody heard of WIC? You know what WIC is? Women, infants, children, right? A government entitlement program set up under who? Nixon, okay? To prevent failure to thrive. They did. This is the equal and opposite reaction. So let's add juice in. Here it is. And so most fructose items, when you put it together, now we're up to 113 pounds on this graph. And I just heard from Brian Williams of NBC News after the most recent study came out that was in the Journal of Clinical Investigation that we are actually up to 141 pounds of sugar per year, each of us. That's what we're up to, 141 pounds of sugar per year. Okay? Now, do you think that this might have some detrimental effects on you? Hasn't stopped you, has it? That's the point. It hasn't stopped you. That's why we need to talk about this.
Now that, as some in the audience may be aware, is that rarest of breeds, a viral 90-minute nutritional science lecture. I mean, that doesn't come along every day, so it's notable perhaps in and of itself just for that. But that is called Sugar, the Bitter Truth, or at least that's the title that it's been posted on, posted under on GooTube. And it is a lecture by Dr. Robert Lustig, who has drawn on the pioneering work of John Yudkin, which is a name that probably will not resonate with almost anyone in the audience, because he was writing about all of the things that people like Lustig and others are now rediscovering decades later. He was writing about this in the 1970s. Specifically, in 1972, he wrote a book called Pure, White, and Deadly: How Sugar is Killing Us and What We Can Do to Stop It, which Lustig says in that lecture. He says, it was amazing when I found this book, and wow, lo and behold, all of the things I was finding in my research, Yudkin already had this, and he was pointing the way everything he said has come to pass. Unfortunately for the human species, because he was talking about the inevitable health decline that would accompany the rise of the consumption of sugar, which continues to rise and rise, so that people are now eating their body weight in sugar every year, whether they are aware of it or not. Probably people are not just dumping sugar on everything they're eating, but it is in everything they are eating. Everything that you are eating, unless you are exceptionally careful and eating only whole, unprocessed foods that you yourself have a large part in the preparation of, you are probably consuming a lot of sugar. And you won't even realize it because it has been infused into everything. Or not even sugar, but high fructose corn syrup and other things that Lustig was warning about in that lecture. And as John Yudkin put it in his 1972 book, quote, if only a small fraction of what is already known about the effects of sugar were to be revealed in relation to any other material used as a food additive, that material would promptly be banned. And that was 4 decades ago. I mean, it's just absolute insanity. But it does raise the question, banned? By whom? Who has the authority to do that? And the exact obverse of that, well, if somebody has the ability to ban this or that substance, then they have the ability to mandate it, or at the very least insert it into nutritional guidelines so that it becomes institutionalized and forced on generations of school children who dutifully learn about the 4 food groups and how much of what to have every day, or whatever indoctrination they get, that they don't even realize how deep down into their subconscious that goes until they one day realize, oh, the food pyramid that I grew up with has been replaced, and now there's choosemyplate.gov. What's going on?